Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I was listening to the Art Bell archives yesterday, and boy, did that bring back some memories. It was kind of funny listening to how he would tell people if they wanted to ask a question, they could just send in a text. Some people would call in and they'd get all upset because if you said something Art didn't like or didn't agree with, or you'd already called in that month, he'd just simply hang up on you. Yep, the good old days, back when you had to listen to it on the radio, or if you wanted to listen at home later on, you could call in and order a cassette tape of the show. That was long ago, and well, they say things have improved, but, well, he did a really good job. Anyway, last week I did a show on monsters. Well, mostly on monsters. I got kind of sidetracked, as I do. As I was doing the research, I began reading some accounts that I wanted to share, so I put them in even though they had nothing to do with monsters. Then later Maggie said I'd already done a few shows on monsters, so I went back and I checked. I've done 4 so far. I have a show called Swamp Monsters from January 25th, 2019. Sea Monsters, which was October 1st, 2016. And I had Flying Monsters, June 26th, 2020. The show last week, of course, also. There are a lot of monster sightings from all over the world, so I'll probably be doing a few more shows. There are the popular creatures, Nessie and Bigfoot, and things people have heard a lot about. I tried to find little-known creatures that made folks' lives exciting and scary at the same time, only to vanish, leaving behind questions. Some monsters are still lurking in places that few people visit. Only the locals know about them. Sprawled out over a large area of southeastern Virginia and North Carolina is a tangled mass of wilderness with a rather cool name. They call it the Great Dismal Swamp. The vast expanse of wetland encompasses the Great Dismal Swamp National Wildlife Refuge and Dismal State Park. What a fascinating name. Where do you work? I'm at the Dismal State Park. How depressing. The name alone might entice some folks to not go near it. It makes me want to go have a look. The swamp covers tens of thousands of acres, and it's very biodiverse. It has a long history of strange encounters. The native tribes lived on the outskirts, but they didn't venture deep into the area. This was where the spirits lived. In the early 1800s, escaped slaves took refuge deep in the interior where nobody wanted to go to look for them. There was an entire settlement grew up over the years. Folks living in the swamp began to encounter bizarre creatures that roamed the place, usually at night, making life interesting and difficult. They would see ghost lights moving about at night. There were snakes and alligators everywhere, and mosquitoes flew in clouds so thick you'd think they were one huge creature. All of this was nothing compared to the beast. There was something much taller than a man. It stood well over 8 feet. It walked on 2 legs. It was covered in hair, and it looked every bit like a wolf man. Back in the 1800s, when the sun went down, folks stayed inside as much as possible. If you needed to venture out, all you had to illuminate your path was a torch or a lantern. If you've ever used an old-style lantern, they don't give off much light. There are no written records of what folks encountered. It's all just word to word, just people telling each other what they'd seen when they were talking to their grandkids. It wasn't until the 1900s that newspapers began carrying stories from the area. In March 1901, a man reported having his dogs attacked by something. These were not lap dogs. They were used for hunting and guarding the farm. Mr. Smith heard a commotion coming from his field. He grabbed his pistol and went to see what was going on. He found his dogs were fighting with what looked like another dog, which was a lot bigger than them. Then it stood up. Mr. Smith said that's when he realized he was looking at the Dismal Swamp Monster. He fired at it several times, but the bullets either missed or had no effect on the creature. The monster killed 7 dogs and then ate several of them. Mr. Ames saw the monster crossing his property. He tried to get his dogs to attack, but they were having nothing to do with the thing. Mr. Ames also tried shooting the monster with no effect. Henry Jordan said he saw the monster on his property. The creature was sitting on a well cover, looking around as if trying to find something, scouting out the area. The creature was big and gaunt-looking. It was covered in yellowish hair that made it look more like a wolf than a man. The eyes glowed when the moonlight hit them. In 1902, the monster was seen again. The witnesses all said it was about 8 feet tall, very thin, had a face of a wolf. The hair was either a yellowish or a very light brown color. Hunters began looking for the swamp monster when a bounty was placed on it. They did manage to shoot several wolves, but none of them came close to being 8 feet tall, and none of them had yellowish fur. The reports of the Dismal Swamp Monster would come up every so many years. There was no pattern ever established. No full moon was needed, and nobody ever tried shooting it with silver bullets. As someone living or traveling through the area, in and around the swamp, would see this huge hair-covered man with a human face and the muzzle of a wolf. There would be several sightings for the next several weeks, and then the beast would vanish back into the swamp. Some folks think the swamp monster was a Bigfoot. Others say it's a dogman. Many sightings of these well-known cryptids can be confusing. If all you see is a hairy hominid, it's hard to tell what you're actually looking at. If you see a muzzle, then the first creature that people think about is the dogman. There's not much difference between a dogman and a wolfman. The legend of the Morbach Monster begins with a soldier named Thomas Johannes Baptist Schweitzer, who had a unique military career. Even though he was German, he served in Napoleon's army during the failed attempt to conquer Russia. Schweitzer was there when the Russians abandoned Moscow in 1812, and they set the city on fire. They destroyed 3/4 of it. The idea was they weren't going to let the French have any place warm to spend the winter. Stranded in a burned out city with no food, Napoleon's army was in bad shape. Morale was in the sewer and discipline was a thing of the past. Sensing defeat and fearing for his life, Schweitzer deserted Napoleon and fled back to his home in Alsace. He fell in with a group of Russian deserters who joined him on his journey back to France. If you were in the military and you decided you didn't want to be in the military anymore, you sure didn't want to hang around some place where you might run into your bosses. So the smart thing to do would be to get as far away from where you were as you could. So Russian soldiers heading into the German region wouldn't be all that uncommon. It was roughly 160 miles north of Alsace that the group came upon a rural German village of Wittlich. And in need of supplies, the men raided a farmhouse and, well, they murdered everybody there. The legend says that the farmer's wife placed a curse on Schweitzer, saying that with each full moon he would turn into a wolf. Schweitzer killed her, but the curse had already been made. Curses are strange things. Some are simply words uttered by angry people, while others will actually hold power over those in its spell. It's hard to tell when a curse is going to work and when it won't. It's kind of like throwing something out, seeing what happens to it. Well, Schweitzer did begin to change. He became extremely depraved and cruel in his dealings with everybody. Whether it was the horrors witnessed during the French invasion of Russia, his shameful journey home, or it was the curse. But Schweitzer seemed to embrace the brutality of robbing, raping, and murdering. A lot of highwaymen would rob a person, take all their money, and then leave, but not Schweitzer. He wanted to play with them a bit after he had all their money. Even his fellow criminals began to think Schweitzer had gone too far. Eventually, they either abandoned him or told him he had best find someplace else to hang out. For whatever reason, Schweitzer was pretty much driven off by his fellow criminals. He kind of abandoned civilization. He began living out in the woods all by himself. After his self-exile, tales of a wolf that walked like a man spread amongst the villagers. The killings all being blamed on a huge man-wolf seen by few survivors. The story of Schweitzer was well known in the area, and the villagers began to suspect that he was turning into a beast, killing and eating people, and then turning back into a human. The best time to catch someone like that is when they're in their human form. Many of his victims had money. Anytime Schweitzer would acquire a handful of gold or silver, he'd venture into town to drink and make trouble. Being part beast, he had little or no limits, and the villagers tried their best to avoid him. After one very bad town visit, the villagers had had enough. They formed up a posse, and they went looking for the man-beast. They found his campsite, and there he was, snoozing by the fire. As the people approached, Schweitzer awoke, and seeing there were too many people to deal with, he took off running. The villagers chased him as far as Morbach. Unable to run any further, Schweitzer tried to fight, but he was overwhelmed. The villagers hung him from a tree. When he was very dead, they cut the body down and buried it. Having heard about the curse, the villagers, in a bid to prevent his return, built a shrine on top of the grave. A candle was placed in the shrine, and each evening one of the villagers would go to the shrine, light the candle, believing that as long as the candle was burning, the creature would be bound to the ground. One summer night, 1988, a group of Air Force personnel were returning to the Morbach U.S. Air Force Munitions Depot, and they were walking past the shrine. One of them noticed the candle was out. Well, having heard the stories, and they were such intelligent men, they began to laugh and mock the superstitious locals, saying that, ooh, it looked like the werewolf was going to come out tonight. Later that evening, the sirens went off, alerting the men that the fence had been breached. Someone or something had activated the perimeter sensors. One of the guards investigating the intrusion reported seeing a huge wolf-like creature standing on two legs. The guard said it held his gaze for a moment before running off and effortlessly leaping over a 10-foot fence. Base personnel attempted to track the creature, but their dogs refused to follow the scent. Nothing would motivate the dogs to follow. Was it a flesh and blood werewolf, or the ghost of a werewolf? Something to think about. The dogs knew better than to go messing with whatever it was. The airmen all laughed about this encounter the next day. Just a mistake made in the dark by a nervous guard. As the sun was nearing the horizon, the laughter dried up. The men began to get nervous. Around sundown, several of them snuck out to the shrine, just a short trip from the gate, and had a look. The candle had been lit by someone. It was a common thing from then on for somebody to just have a peek at the shrine to be sure the candle was still lit each night. Remy van Leerd was a World War II flying ace who became an inspiration to the Belgian people after he managed to escape Nazi-occupied country and join the Royal Air Force. He was a skilled pilot, and he rose through the ranks. He became especially well known for shooting down dozens of V-1 rockets. At the end of World War II, Leerd returned to Belgium and became a high-ranking officer. In 1959, he was given command of the Kamina Air Base in the Belgian Congo. Being the top guy, he was responsible for keeping the area under control. It was a common thing for him to fly around in a helicopter to see what was going on. On one trip, the colonel spotted a huge snake crawling along the ground. Leerd told the pilot to circle around for a better look. The pilot hovered right over the snake, and the men had a good look at it. This thing was impossibly big. Leerd told the pilot to get a bit closer so he could get a better look. As the helicopter got down to about 15 feet, the snake lunged upwards at them. It rose about 10 feet in the air. The pilot immediately pulled back on the stick and took them up to a higher altitude. Colonel Leerd guesstimated that the snake must have been 50 feet or more long. The enormous snake would have been a great find to show off to the world, but the Congo was in the process of becoming an independent country, and the colonel had bigger problems than trying to capture or kill a giant snake. The experts all say that the biggest snake in the world is a 30-foot anaconda. Colonel Percy Fawcett had found a 65-foot snake while exploring the Amazon. Fawcett wasn't just some guy who imagined things. He was a respected explorer, and he had seen a lot of bizarre things. The Yakumama, which translates as Mother of the Water, was recently photographed showing a 130-foot snake. How big can a snake get? If you listen to the experts, you'll never know for sure. But the way I understand it, as long as a snake doesn't get killed by something else, and as long as it can find food to eat, it'll just keep growing. A monster was seen flying around the countryside in Iowa in 1903. A very bizarre creature that looked like a giant bat with a horn that gave off light. The town of Van Meter is west of Des Moines. In the 1900s, it was populated by about 500 people. It was just a small town with a mine and a brick kiln. They were doing okay, and most of the townsfolk were well off. One night, a salesman had arrived home from a long out-of-town trip. He was driving through town heading home when he saw a light emanating from above one of the stores. He thought the owners had a spotlight on, trying to bring in business. As he watched the light, it moved along the roof, and then it went over the side. The light was moving along on its own. It sailed from one roof to the next. The salesman watched, wondering what he was seeing. He noticed the light was coming from a huge black creature that looked like a cross between a bat and a human. It had a horn on its head, and this was the source of the light. The light shone in a line like a spotlight. It didn't emanate out in every direction like a torch would. Few people took him seriously when he told them about what he had seen the next day. Well, that next night, a Dr. Olcott, who slept in his office on Main Street, was awakened by a bright light shining in his face. His office and home were on the second floor of a building. He grabbed a shotgun and ran outside, where he saw a monster, half human, half beast, with great bat-like wings. There was a dazzling light that fairly blinded him, coming from a blunt horn-like protuberance in the middle of the animal's forehead, and gave off a stupefying odor that almost overcame him. The doctor discharged his weapon and fled into his office, barring the doors and windows and remaining there vigilantly watching for the monster until morning. The townsfolk began to suspect there was more to this than just hallucinations. They began to arm themselves, and everyone was off the streets by nightfall. Some folks believed this was some kind of a monster, while others said it was a hoax of some kind, maybe to get people off the streets so they could rob the bank. Peter Dunn was the cashier of the bank. Fearing that bank robbers were coming to steal everything at night, he went to the bank at night with a shotgun, and he spent the entire evening watching and waiting to see if anything was coming. At 2 o'clock, he was blinded by a light of great intensity coming in through the front window. It took him a few seconds to recover. He fired directly at the light, blowing the window out at the same time. The light vanished immediately, and Dunn looked out through the hole to see if he'd gotten anyone. There was nothing on the sidewalk. In the morning, they found huge three-toed footprints in the dirt street. A plaster was poured into the prints, making casts. The following night, Dr. White saw the monster climbing down a telephone pole. It looked like the monster was using its beak, kind of like how a parrot would, to climb a tree. Once on the ground, the creature began to move in short hops using its hind legs and its folded up wings. Knowing this to be the Van Meter monster, the doctor fired at it with his handgun. The sound of shooting attracted others to the scene. There was an overpowering smell coming from the monster, making it hard to get too close to it. As the witnesses watched, the monster jumped into the air and began to fly away, heading towards the nearby hills. The witnesses decided it was heading to the old mine, which was near the brickyard. Over the rest of the week, people would hear the sound of giant wings flapping overhead. Few people would venture out. As soon as the sun went down, everybody was in their house with the doors locked. Those with weapons would sit up all night, watching the windows. Those without weapons, they would go visit somebody that did have them. The principal of the school, Professor Martin, heard the descriptions of what people were seeing, and he said that the monster must be some kind of an antediluvian creature, something from before Noah's flood. The foreman at the brickyard said he had heard some weird sounds coming from the mine entrance. He thought maybe the creature was hiding in the mine during the day and coming out after sundown. Many of the men working the yard said they had heard the sounds as well. An armed posse set up around the entrance to the mine and waited for the sun to go down. As darkness fell, the monster came hopping up out of the mine shaft. It was not alone. There was a second, smaller monster at its side. The posse opened fire on the two creatures with little or no effect. They both leaped into the sky and flew away. From here, there are two stories. One story says that the town folks waited until the two monsters returned. Once they entered the mine, the men ran forward and placed dynamite in the entrance. They either blew the entrance shut or they threw dirt and debris into the opening, sealing the monsters underground. A second story says the mine was blown shut as soon as the two monsters had flown away. The creatures, being denied their hiding place, flew away to some other location. Even today, people visiting the brickyard and the mine say they get an uneasy feeling as if something is lurking nearby watching them. Yes, I watched Expedition X. They didn't cover the details as well as they should have. I didn't hear anybody mention the bright light. Jessica Chobot, the self-proclaimed paranormal enthusiast, sure was easily swayed by Phil Torres. At the end of the show, she was like, oh, these people were all just fooled by the shadow of a small bat. Oh, that's Hollywood for you. The folks at Hollywood should have kept Chad Lewis on the show. He has studied the story in depth, and he's written a book about it, but, well, Hollywood just doesn't like to have people that disagree with their point of view. It seems to me as if Expedition X is trying to disprove ghosts and UFOs and things like that. But like I said, that's Hollywood. April 30th, 2021, a UFO landed in a Bolivian village. I know, this isn't a UFO show. No, I'm not getting sidetracked again, I hope. A UFO landed in a Bolivian village of Montegudo and released a weird-looking creature. This thing looked like the chupacabras. This would be the Puerto Rican chupacabras and not the Texas blue dog creature. The witnesses, and there were many of them, said they first heard a rumbling sound coming from the sky. They thought this might be thunder, but the skies were clear. They saw a fiery craft coming down from above. The craft sat down and a doorway opened. This weird-looking monster came bounding out of the ship, which then took off, leaving the creature behind. The creature was about a foot tall, and it had 3 fingers on each hand. It had huge eyes, but it acted as if it was having a hard time seeing. It bumped into trees as it tried to walk. As it went, apparently its eyesight must have improved because it began wandering the streets as if hunting for its prey. The creature walked the streets for some time. All the villagers watched from their windows, since they had all run inside and locked the doors. It made its way towards the edge of town. Eventually, the creature disappeared into the countryside. Nobody in town reported any dead goats or sheep, but the creature was not seen again after that one night. Reporters and UFO investigators went to the town and they interviewed everyone who was willing to talk. That turned out to be just about everyone. They also found 3-toed footprints all over the streets. An interstellar monster? How about a monster delivery service? The more I looked into this, the more questions I came up with. Did the spaceship land with the intentions of releasing a monster on the town? Is this something we need to watch for in the future? After all, this wasn't that long ago. May 21st, 2020, a couple living in Huasteca region of San Luis Potosi heard a loud boom coming from the mountains. At first, they thought it was simply a landslide. This idea was replaced by thoughts of somebody setting off explosives. A landslide would have gone on for some time. Instead, the sound was short and loud. The couple scanned the mountains, trying to see what had caused the sound. The woman spotted movement. She looked closer, and she could make out a giant thing walking along the mountainside. She told her husband, who at first thought she was just seeing things, but when he looked closer at where she was pointing, he could also see this giant thing as it walked. They both thought maybe it was some form of a Bigfoot. The giant looked more human without the hair covering its body. They both thought they were now looking at a giant that had somehow caused the explosion. It was moving on its hands with its feet on the ground, like it was leaning forward. The thing was moving down the side of the mountain, and they became afraid, thinking if it saw them, it might come their way. This didn't look like any kind of a friendly monster. They grabbed their son, ran inside, and locked the doors. The next day, the couple told their neighbors about seeing this giant something. They were surprised to hear the neighbors had also seen it. Soon, most of the town was talking about the monster from the mountain. The story was very similar to legends from the village, telling about a giant creature, or a race of giant creatures that lived in the mountains. There's no story about any kind of interaction between the villagers and these giants. Nobody ever went closer to see who they were or what they were, and nobody came up missing that was associated with this giant sighting. Someone managed to take 3 photos. One of the images looked more like an animal with long front legs than the back legs. As the story of the giant was spreading through town, some folks reported seeing weird lights in the sky that flew right over where the giant was seen. The lights were seen a few minutes before the giant showed up, making some believe this giant creature was an alien from outer space. March 9th, 2020. A group of beachgoers in Mexico were startled when they discovered the remains of what appeared to be an eyeless sea creature that had washed ashore. The puzzling oddity was spotted on the Pacific coast beach of Destiladeras, near the popular tourist destination of Puerto Vallarta. The people who found the carcass initially thought it was just a dolphin, but their theory was upended when they got a closer look at the creature. The monstrous thing that came from the deep had no eyes, no fins, and it sported a very long body. Since there are areas off the coast of Puerto Vallarta that reach depths of around 3,200 feet, it is suspected that perhaps the creature resided in the realm of the ocean that is so dark it evolved to not have any eyes. The body showed no signs of having been damaged where the fins or the eyes should have been. It was intact and mostly undamaged. The creature looked a bit like an eel, only there's no fin running along its body. The skin of the sea monster was smooth like that of a dolphin. The teeth looked more like something out of a dinosaur. As of yet, no biology expert, a marine biologist, have come forward to identify the beast, and the area fishermen say that they've never seen anything like it. What the creature was, nobody knows, and what happened to it. Apparently, they just left the body laying on the shore, and, well, it wasn't there later on. Another mysterious creature with no eyes, big teeth, and a bizarre body shape had been discovered by a local resident walking near Charleston, South Carolina. A woman named Constantine was walking her dog when she found the skeletal remains on the beach. The skull had no openings for eyes. There was some skin still attached to the body. It didn't look very much like a monster found in Mexico, but two eyeless creatures washing up on the shore is a bit, well, actually a whole lot, weird. Miss Constantine said the creature might have come from a secret island overrun by monkeys nearly 40 miles away. Yes, there is an island full of monkeys in North Carolina. South Carolina. The island is actually named Morgan Island. It is uninhabited, and it is overrun with monkeys. In the 1970s, there was a monkey research facility in Puerto Rico. The lab was run like most government facilities, and it didn't take long for the monkeys to begin escaping. These creatures had been given all kinds of injections, chemicals, drugs, you name it, and then studied. The locals became angry when they found out that disease-carrying primates were running loose in their area. The government moved the research facility to Morgan Island, South Carolina, and they let the monkeys run loose all over the place. What could possibly go wrong? After all, it's not like monkeys can swim. Did you know that monkeys can swim? Apparently, the government hadn't figured this out in the 70s because the monkeys were allowed to run free and swim away if they wanted. Constantine said she thought one of the monkeys from the Monkey Island might have gotten swept up in the current and washed ashore there near Charleston. Her theory doesn't explain why the creature she found had no eye sockets, unless it was from some kind of weird experiment. September 2019, a 3-foot-long head with a snake-like body was seen on the Yangtze River in China. The witnesses all said that this was no snake. It was more like what they considered the Loch Ness Monster would look like. They all said what they were seeing was only the very top part of some enormous creature swimming under the surface. Some people did manage to get videos of the creature, but the images were very far away and made it very difficult to focus on what you were seeing. If you zoom in too much, all you get are a bunch of pixels. The videos were examined by Loch Ness researchers who all agreed that the images looked just like their creature. They looked just like Nessie. January 2020, a British tourist was trying to cross Nuel Hupai Lake in Argentina in a kayak when he spotted something in the water below him. He said it was snake-like, maybe 10 or 20 feet long. It swam under his kayak and vanished. More Loch Ness creature-type sightings? Someday I want to visit the Big Bend National Park. Spend at least a week or two there and see what all they've got. It's only 422 miles one way. Well, that's closer than Jefferson, and I go there a lot. There are hiking trails all over the place. Hundreds of native species of plants not seen in other parts of the country, and there are dinosaurs. The mountain boomer has been seen by visitors to the park. The boomer stands about 5 to 5.5 feet tall. It's covered in greenish-brown skin, and it runs on 2 legs. It's called the mountain boomer because it produces a bark like distant thunder. The monster, described as a theropod, lives in the remote mountainous region. There's a smaller version of the mountain boomer. It stands about a foot tall, and it's called the eastern collared lizard. In the 1970s, a man in the Big Bend area reported his car had been run off the road by a theropod, dinosaur, and in the early 1990s, a person said he encountered a small dinosaur eating roadkill. He saw the monster in the distance as he was driving. He was certain what he was looking at, but when the car approached, the dinosaur turned and ran off. A UFO researcher, Jimmy Ward, wrote about the mountain boomer in an article by the same name. He interviewed a Connecticut family who were traveling through Texas, and they saw this enormous lizard. It had huge back legs, small front legs, and it looked like it had come from the movie Jurassic Park. Dinosaurs in Texas. Yes, we seem to have it all. April 2011, a woman was walking along West Davis Street in Hebronville, Texas. As she was coming to Rondado Road, this is as far as the street would go, this is also the edge of town, she spotted dust cloud over the trees. It was about 5:45 p.m., and the sun was nearing the horizon. She noticed the dust cloud was getting closer to the side of the road. It didn't look like something cattle would have made. It must have been some really fast-moving animal. Still walking, she glanced at the dust a few times until something came into view. About 40 feet away was a 2.5-foot tall dinosaur. Not just any dinosaur, but she said it was a T-Rex. The creature kept running as it passed by on the opposite side of Rondado Road. It was running on 2 legs, with its tail stretched out behind. The skin was a reddish-brown color. Standing there staring at something that shouldn't be there, the witness was at a loss to explain what she was seeing. I worked in Hebronville many times during my time in the Border Patrol. I drove up and down Rondado Road a lot, especially after hearing about these dinosaur sightings. The field across from Davis Street is pretty much open with just a few small bushes growing here and there. Ranchers in the area complain about cattle that go missing without any trace as to where they disappeared. Maybe they're on the menu for the local dinosaur. December 2012, a person reported seeing a pair of dinosaurs in Falfurrias, about 18 miles east of Hebronville. The description is about the same. People have also seen dinosaurs running around just outside McAllen and in Mexico just across the river. In the summer of 1969, folks living in Fort Worth began seeing something really weird. The first reports were written off as being drunks or hoaxes, kids out partying too hard, or people with too much time on their hands. The stories would trickle in and be ignored by the authorities. The first time the reports were taken seriously was July 10th. John Reichert, his wife, and two other couples were sitting by the lake enjoying the evening. At about midnight, a monster jumped onto the hood of their car. It was covered in hair and scales. The head looked like it came from a goat. The officer taking the report didn't want to believe them, but there were 6 people, all sober, giving the same story. 4 police cars were sent to investigate their story. The officers didn't find any sign of a monster near the lake, but the car had enormous scratches running along the sides and the hood. They looked as if they'd been made by claws. Almost exactly 24 hours after this encounter, Jack Harris, driving on the only road going into Lake Worth Nature Center, said he spotted the creature crossing in front of him. And he was not alone. There were people from all over the area that had come out to the lake hoping to see the monster. It ran up and down on a bluff, and soon there was a crowd of about 30 or 40 people all standing watching this thing as it moved back and forth. They'd heard about it when the Fort Worth Star-Telegram had put out a headline story saying, "Fishy man-goat terrifies couples parked at Lake Worth." Well, you read that in the newspaper, you're going to go look. Well, at least I would go look. Within a short time, sheriff's deputies were on the scene as well. Everyone was standing there looking up at this weird-looking creature. When a few of them started to move closer to get a better view, the monster picked up a car tire, rim and all. This would be about 30 to 40 pounds, and it threw it at the assembled crowd. This caused an immediate rush for the vehicles. The witnesses were gone, heading for the road out of there. The monster turned and walked back into the brush. The witnesses from the incident said the Lake Worth monster was several feet tall. 7 feet tall. Several. That'd be like 2 or 3 feet. 7 feet tall. They estimated that it weighed about 300 pounds. It walked on 2 feet, and it had whitish gray hair. Some said it looked more like a giant white ape. It left behind tracks that were 16 inches long and 8 inches across. One witness said the creature had a pitiful cry. It sounded as if it was in pain. It did not sound human. The tire-throwing creature wasn't enough to stop people wanting to see the monster. Now they were showing up armed with shotguns and rifles. Most folks wanting to hunt the creature were building up their courage using massive amounts of alcohol. The authorities were afraid the situation was turning into a dangerous circus. After all, the clowns had arrived. 3 men out looking for the creature one night said it leaped onto their car. It only jumped off of the hood after the vehicle had run into a tree. Another group of 3 men spent a week tracking the beast without ever managing to find it. They did hear it cry, and they could smell a foul odor associated with it. As they were searching for the creature, they did find some dead sheep that all had their necks broken. The men believed that the creature had killed them. October 1969, a man named Alan Plaster, he was the owner of a dress shop, managed to take a photograph of the Lake Worth monster. This is the only photographic evidence of the creature. The picture does show a large white body, but it's kind of indistinct and you can't really figure out what it is you're looking at. The sporadic sightings would be logged for years afterwards. The local official report, the last official report of the Lake Worth monster, is attributed to Charles Buchanan. Buchanan said he had been dozing in his sleeping bag in the back of his pickup when something reached over the side and lifted him up. Buchanan grabbed a package of chicken that he had been using as bait and shoved it at the monster. Apparently, the monster accepted this offering and left Buchanan alone. It jumped into the water and swam away. As sightings fell off, folks stopped driving around looking for the monster. There are still a few people who on occasion will go out to Lake Worth and have a look. In 1970, in Amarillo, Texas, a man moved his family into a ranch house out in the brush. After a few days, things got interesting. The mother was out walking when she discovered there was a den of wolf cubs near the house. You don't want wolves living near your house. They're going to grow up and then they're going to eat your livestock and maybe try and eat you too. Actually, there hasn't been a reporting of a human killed by a wolf in this country in forever. She got her husband to walk out to the den to see what they could do to drive the wolves away. They discovered the wolves were dead. The den was abandoned. None of the cubs were ever found. The father rolled the dead bodies over and looked for signs of what had killed them. It didn't take long to realize something a lot bigger and a lot more powerful had killed all of the adults. What could have taken on a pack of wolves? The next evening, the father had a nightmare. He had a premonition of intense foreboding, and a warning came to him saying that he should pack up and move. When he awoke in a cold sweat, he discovered he needed the facilities. So he went outside to the outhouse. There was a huge humanoid figure standing a short ways off. It had huge glowing red eyes. It was looking towards the ranch house as if studying it. In the morning he told his wife what he had dreamed about, as well as what he had seen. His wife said she had had the same dream. That night, the grandmother, who lived a short distance away, had a terrible feeling. Something was wrong with her son. So, she sent her other son, along with his family, to have a check, look and see what his brother was doing, and find out if there was any kind of a danger coming to them. The brother was almost to the house when the car started to overheat. He knew there was a well nearby, and so he went to get some water to top off the radiator. He was walking through the brush when he saw the thing with the red eyes step out from behind the brush, right in front of him. The brother turned and ran back to the car. He told his family to run to the brother's house. The brother grabbed his shotgun and a hunting knife so he could cover their mad dash. The creature came charging out of the dark, straight at him. He fired nearly point-blank range several times, but it had no effect. He decided it was time to get out of there, so he did. He ran as fast as he could to the house. The creature followed behind him, but it came to a halt just short of the hill that the house sat on. The entire family was awake, and they could see this monster at the bottom of the hill staring up at them. The father told all the kids to get in the bed of the truck. Then he covered them with blankets. The adults all crowded into the cab of the truck. The black shape was still there, staring at the house. There's only one way to go, so the father drove past the creature, praying it wouldn't attack them. Its gaze never left the house. As the truck was about to get away, the creature turned and began to chase after it. The people in the truck thought they were going to die when the thing suddenly stopped following. It was right at the line where the sandy soil of the ranch ended and the grass of the next area began. The entire family spent the night at the grandmother's house. With the sun in the sky driving away any monsters, the family went back to the ranch to collect their things and find someplace else to live. They discovered the owner of the ranch was there, along with the sheriff's department and a whole lot of men in uniform who looked like soldiers. The house looked as if something had torn it to pieces. Two of the men in uniform had canines with them. The dogs tracked someone or something up into the attic. Thinking there was a fugitive or maybe some kind of an escaped animal, the dogs were sent into the attic. A huge fight broke out, followed by dogs being thrown from the attic. The two men went into the attic to see what was there. The people outside heard gunfire. One of the men was thrown from the attic window. He was dead before he hit the ground. When the people gathered on the ground looked up towards the window, they saw a creature looking down at them. It looked like a big, bald-headed, blue-skinned man with big red eyes and sharp claws. The guy in charge of the military ordered them to open fire. All the soldiers, as well as the deputies, began firing at this blue-skinned thing. The house was set on fire, and then it was allowed to burn until nothing was left but ashes. They searched the ashes for any sign of the blue thing, but as far as the witnesses could tell, they didn't find anything. An immediate cover-up was initiated. No news reports were ever allowed, and nobody would talk about what had happened to the house, the dogs, or the two soldiers. A woman named Jackie was on her way home to Cold Springs, Texas, at around 10 p.m. As she was passing the Livingston Dam, when she saw something odd in the road ahead. In her headlights, she saw a fur-covered creature crossing the road. As she got closer, she felt some kind of unease come over her. Her skin was crawling, and she had goosebumps. The animal looked more like a small boy crawling on his hands and his feet, holding his backside high up in the air. As the fur-covered boy got to the far side of the road, he stopped and watched as Jackie went by. Their eyes met. The creature looked almost like a dog with a human face, and the body was half human and half dog. It freaked her out so bad she stomped on the gas and sped away, not slowing down until miles down the road. Some kind of a young dog man or dog boy? A feral kid who lived in the wild? Maybe some kind of unknown animal that had the body and the face more like humans, but still mostly animal. In the 1800s, Texas was still wide open. Few people lived in the middle of the newly formed country. If you wanted to eat, you had to grow crops or hunt. Most did both. Just outside Marshall, a rancher wanted his son to learn how to do all the things needed to survive. The boy didn't much care for farming or hunting. He liked to read and dream. The father decided his son was old enough to go hunting without someone watching over his shoulder. He handed the boy a rifle and told him, "Don't come home empty-handed." The boy went into the brush hoping to bag something, anything, quick, so he could get back to his books. After a few hours, the boy was back on the porch. His father asked where was the meat he was supposed to get. The boy said he'd shot a deer, but a huge wolf had come along and taken the kill away before he could get to it. He only had a single-shot rifle. The father figured the boy must have just been trying to get out of doing his duty, helping put food on the table. He sent his son back out saying, "Don't come home until he had bagged something." Around sundown, the father began to worry. The area around the ranch wasn't that dangerous. Maybe the boy was injured. Hopefully, he was just slowed down, having to drag a huge deer along the trail. The rancher grabbed his rifle and went looking. As he went by other ranches or farms, he would ask if they'd seen his son. When others heard about the missing boy, they would grab their rifles or shotguns and join the search party. As the darkness grew around them, the search party walked into a clearing. In the middle was some kind of a huge animal crouching over its meal. The thing looked like a wolf, only it was way too big to be any kind of a normal animal. The sound of the searchers coming up behind the beast alerted it. The thing stood up. It towered over the ranchers, standing 8 feet tall. It was covered in brownish hair, and the face was that of a wolf. Its jaws were covered in blood. The creature was standing over the body of the rancher's son. The men all opened fire. The bullets had no effect on the beast. It howled, turned, and ran away faster than any man or wolf could have gone. Over the years following this incident, people have reported seeing a half-man, half-wolf running around all over the area. Marshall is just south from Jefferson, Texas, where the Texas Bigfoot Conference is held each year. Halloween is coming up fast. Time to stock up on candy to keep the goblins happy. I will be talking about my book, Paranormal Laredo, at the Phoenix Bookstore, 1602 Victoria Street here in Laredo, on October 9th from about 5 till 7. Come by and buy a few books or just enjoy some weird stories. If you have a subject you'd like to hear on the show, or a story to add to my next book, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. All the show archives are available at www.spreaker.com/show/strange-things-with-Chris-James. Some of these addresses are getting a little long, but then you figure how many website locations there are out there, how many pages on websites. You're going to have a longer and longer addresses all the time. You can also find the archives on YouTube. And I am on iHeartRadio if you're using your smartphone, as well as just about every podcast server out there. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.